Hi everyone. Okay, so today we are reading chapter 2. I hope that you liked chapter 1. You thought of your reasons to save Wilbur or some reasons not to save Wilbur for being the runt of the litter. And remember, runt means that it's the smallest pig in the litter or any smallest animal in any litter, like the smallest puppy, smallest kitty. Um, and so in chapter 1, we learned about the 5 characters so far. We have Fern's whole family, we have Wilbur, and we know that Fern saved Wilbur from being killed for being the runt of the litter. And Fern called that a terrible act of injustice. That was so unfair. Wilbur should not be killed for being small. And she says to her dad, "What would you have done if I was small? Would you kill me?" And so we learn that Fern is very compassionate for Wilbur. She feels bad that her dad even wanted to kill Wilbur in the first place for being small. That's crazy. And she says that it's a terrible act of injustice, that it's unfair. Remember, injustice means unfair. So we're going to continue on with chapter 2. I want you to think about some character traits that you notice about Fern and think of the order of events that we have happening in the story. There's going to be a quiz on chapters 1 and 2 after this video, so make sure you're paying attention to the story and paying attention to things I say because I'm going to be saying things that are on the quiz. So let's go ahead and read chapter 2. Fern loved Wilbur more than anything. She loved to stroke him, to feed him, to put him to bed. Every morning, as soon as she got up, she warmed his milk, tied his bib on, and held the bottle for him. Every afternoon, when the school bus stopped in front of her house, she jumped out and ran to the kitchen to fix another bottle for him. She fed him again at supper time, and again just before going to bed. Mrs. Arable gave him a feeding around noontime each day, when Fern was away in school. Wilbur loved his milk, and he was never happier than when Fern was warming up a bottle for him. He would stand and gaze up at her with adoring eyes. For the first few days of his life, Wilbur was allowed to live in a box near the stove in the kitchen. Then, when Mrs. Arable complained, he was moved to a bigger box in the woodshed. At 2 weeks of age, he was moved outdoors. It was apple blossom time, and the days were getting warmer. Mr. Arable fixed a small yard especially for Wilbur under an apple tree and gave him a large wooden box full of straw with a doorway cut in it so he could walk in and out as he pleased. "Won't he be cold at night?" asked Fern. "No," said her father. "You watch and see what he does." So that's another place where Fern is compassionate. She's worried about Wilbur being cold when he sleeps. Carrying a bottle of milk, Fern sat down under the apple tree inside the yard. Wilbur ran to her, and she held the bottle for him while he sucked. When he had finished the last drop, he grunted and walked sleepily into the box. Fern peered through the door. Wilbur was poking the straw with his snout. In a short time, he had dug a tunnel in the straw. He crawled into the tunnel and disappeared from sight, completely covered with straw. Fern was enchanted. It relieved her mind to know that her baby would sleep covered up and would stay warm. So here's a little box that Wilbur's sleeping in. There's Fern with Wilbur. Every morning after breakfast, Wilbur walked out to the road with Fern and waited with her till the bus came. She would wave goodbye to him, and he would stand and watch the bus until it vanished around a turn. While Fern was in school, Wilbur was shut up inside his yard. But as soon as she got home in the afternoon, she would take him out and he would follow her around the place. If she went into the house, Wilbur went too. If she went upstairs, Wilbur would wait at the bottom step until she came down again. If she took her doll for a walk in the doll carriage, Wilbur followed along. Sometimes on these journeys, Wilbur would get tired, and Fern would pick him up and put him in the carriage alongside the doll. He liked this, and if he was very tired, he would close his eyes and go to sleep under the doll's blanket. He looked cute when his eyes were closed because his lashes were so long. The doll would close her eyes too, and Fern would wheel the carriage very slowly and smoothly so as not to wake her infants. One warm afternoon, Fern and Avery put on bathing suits and went down to the brook for a swim. Wilbur tagged along at Fern's heels. When she waded into the brook, Wilbur waded in with her. He found the water quite cold, too cold for his liking. So while the children swam and played and splashed water at each other, Wilbur amused himself in the mud along the edge of the brook where it was warm and moist and delightfully sticky and oozy. Every day was a happy day, and every night was peaceful. Wilbur was what farmers called a spring pig, which simply means that he was born in springtime. So here's Fern with her doll and Wilbur in the carriage. When he was 5 weeks old, Mr. Arable said he was now big enough to sell and would have to be sold. Fern broke down and wept, but her father was firm about it. Wilbur's appetite had increased. He was beginning to eat scraps of food in addition to milk. Mr. Arable was not willing to provide for him any longer. He had already sold Wilbur's 10 brothers and sisters. "He's got to go, Fern," he said. "You've had your fun raising a baby pig, but Wilbur is not a baby any longer, and he has got to be sold." "Call up the Zuckermans," suggested Mrs. Arable to Fern. "Your Uncle Homer sometimes raises a pig, and if Wilbur goes there to live, you can walk down the road and visit him as often as you like." "How much money should I ask for him?" Fern wanted to know. "Well," said her father, "he's a runt. Tell your Uncle Homer you've got a pig you'll sell for $6 and see what he says." It was soon arranged. Fern phoned and got her Aunt Edith. Her Aunt Edith hollered for Uncle Homer, and Uncle Homer came in from the barn and talked to Fern. When he heard that the price was only $6, he said he would buy the pig. Next day, Wilbur was taken from his home under the apple tree and went to live in a manure pile in the cellar of Zuckerman's barn. So that is the end of chapter 2. So on Google Classroom, there's a quiz for chapters 1 and 2. So make sure you listen to all the videos before you take the quiz so you have all the information. So this chapter we learned it was pretty short, but we learned some more character traits about Fern. We know that she's compassionate, she's smart, she's confident. She stands up to her dad when she doesn't agree with him, so she's pretty wise. She has her own thoughts and her own opinions, and she's not afraid to say them to her parents or anyone, and defends Wilbur. And so what the problem is now is that Wilbur is getting big enough to sell. He's still the runt of the litter, but the runts still grow up and they still turn into big pigs. So he may have been the smallest in the litter, but now people might want him because he's starting to grow and he's starting to eat a lot more and become a bigger pig. So he's big enough to sell and would have to be sold. So now Wilbur's going to live somewhere else, and it's in a manure pile, but it's with Fern's aunt and uncle. So maybe she'll get to see Wilbur some more, and we'll find out. So make sure you take the chapter 1 and 2 quiz, and we will do chapter 3 tomorrow.